Hello. So I am Yoshi, and as you can see here, I have this really lovely systems map that I made for one of my other classes on here. And I thought what a better way to present, because I did research for my English class, and I also studied plastics, so I studied for both these classes. And I thought what better way to present this research than to do a little webinar. So I'm doing a little webinar on plastics. I've made this little presentation based on all the information that's in here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to present some of this to you now. So I've kind of focused on the problem that plastics are harming our health, and the demographic I really focused on was the people in poor communities. If you go through some of my research I did for the English class, you can see that I dug into areas of Zimbabwe, like Makopia, or I forget what the city's called, but there's a city in Zimbabwe that is very riddled with plastics, and I focused on that city as part of my research and just noticed that, and the researchers there really noticed that there was bad things that were happening because of the plastic, and it was causing big environmental issues and huge trash problems throughout the city. And I'm kind of focused on my research for this class, for not the English class, but for this other class, I really focused on poor neighborhoods in Utah with lots of pollution like West Valley. So I just want to put my position out before I dive into this webinar and kind of tell you where I'm at, where I'm standing. There's more to read here. Feel free to pause this webinar and read through this more. But essentially, I'm a male student going to UVU. I had an incident like a while ago growing up. Anyways, I grew up and I lived next to the local dump. And I'd see the garbage trucks bringing all the garbage to the dump, and it just, wasn't the most sightly thing growing up next to the dump. I was up by Fairfield. And then about 2 years ago, I was listening to this podcast by Laura Sullivan, who hosts Planet Money, and Sarah Gonzalez, and they dived into how the plastics industry really lied to us about recycling. And it really sparked this thing in me, and I was like, this whole plastic thing, it's all a lie. And then it really kind of dug in, and I really feel like I hold grudges against ExxonMobil and Chevron and some of those big plastic companies. So we're in a really big plastic crisis. There's limited oil resources, new plants are being built, the oceans are being filled with plastic, there's a huge plastic island. It's detrimental to marine life. Like I was talking about in Zimbabwe, there's little to no infrastructure for waste management in this little suburb of Zimbabwe. I forget exactly which town the suburb was in. I'm also not good at pronouncing the towns in Zimbabwe, but that's besides the fact. The trash is building up. There's homemade landfills all throughout the outskirts of town, and lots of people are just burning trash, which just sends tons of pollution and bad stuff into the environment that you probably don't want to be breathing in. I mean, it just kind of seems like common sense. So let's kind of go over the history of plastic. In 1862, Alexander Perkins invents Perkistine. Then around the 1920s, we start, polymers get defined. Then polyethylene is discovered. Then Teflon. And then World War II, there's a huge plastic boom, and people are like, oh wow, plastic, it's this wonderful, it's an amazing thing. Everybody should use plastic. And then by the 1950s, polypropylene was created. That's really common plastic. It's the one with the little number 5 in the recycling symbol. You find that in plastic bowls and plastic cups and those sorts of things. Not the disposable ones, but the reusable ones. Or those clear plastic tubs, that's also polypropylene. In 1954, styrofoam was invented, which is controversial plastic in today's day and age, but it was invented. Around 1957, the first plastic sandwich bag was introduced. We hit the 1960s and the 1970s, and plastics are entering the consumer culture. And then there's this big Earth Day, and people are like, oh, plastic, it's a big problem. And then big plastic, like ExxonMobil and Chevron and other companies, were like, this plastic thing, it's a huge problem. We need to take care of this. How can we fix this plastic problem? And then they thought, oh, we'll throw a little bit of money at recycling and say, oh, we're going to increase recycling infrastructure. Plastic is this wonderful thing, it's recyclable. And then they decided to stamp a little recycling symbol on the bottom of plastic containers to further confuse the public. And it worked. Today, the plastic crisis is way worse. In 1997, they discovered this big island of plastic in the ocean, and they're like, oh, shoot, that's bad. And then in 2002, Bangladesh was the first country to ban plastic bags, which is like phenomenal. In 2015, they banned plastic microbeads in cosmetics, which they determined were causing lots of potentially bad health side effects. In 2018, China's like, we're going to stop accepting plastic imports, because that was where a lot of our recycling was going up until 2018. And 2021, EU's like, we're going to ban single-use plastics like cutlery, straws, and foam containers, which is great. There's less plastic in Europe now as a result. In 2023, the UN started their Global Plastic Treaty, which is aimed at reducing overall plastics used worldwide. It's going to be this wonderful, phenomenal thing that when it comes into place. And then in 2024, guess what happened? The largest virgin plastic facility was opened in Turkey, which is not great for the history of plastics. And then we have some executive orders by Donald Trump very recently, like declaring a national energy emergency and establishing the National Energy Dominance Council, both of which make it really easy to get natural gas out of the earth, which is contains petroleum, which is a precursor to 90% of the plastics a lot of the plastics that we use today. Also, he had passed an executive order to reinstate plastic straws, which was a step backwards. So let's kind of talk about what's keeping people, excuse me, what's kind of keeping people into plastic. So at the tip, we've got Donald Trump reinstating plastic straws or toxic chemicals found in black kitchen utensils. And there's patterns kind of keeping this in place. Plastic production continues to increase. There's limited recycling efforts. Plastic is being misused in poor countries and areas. There's consumer behavior. Consumers are like, you know, the only option is plastic, so I'm just going to buy plastic. Then you get advertisements for maybe it's for recycling, or maybe it's an advertisement for your favorite soda pop, but it only comes in a plastic bottle. You can't get XYZ soda pop in a can. Or government policies, where governments are like permissive to plastic instead of making policies that are restrictive to plastic. And then there's these mental models kind of locking people in at the bottom of the iceberg. You've got the fact that plastic can be recycled. Plastic is taken for granted. There's a lack of education on plastic out there right now. People have the perception that plastic is harmless. I feel like there should be more education on that. In fact, I'm going to touch about that further in this webinar. There is some feedback loops. Let me go ahead and move my camera around on the screen so you can actually see these feedback loops. So, you know, we make plastic, then it gets used, then we throw it away, then we need plastic, then we make plastic, then we use the plastic, and then we're like, oh, maybe we'll recycle the plastic, but then the polymers will degrade, and then it'll still eventually be thrown away. And if we need plastic, we're going to have to increase the plastic production, which will lower the cost of products. And then consumers are like, we want cheaper products. And so then they're like, oh, well, then let's make more plastic. Or the consumers consume more of the cheap plastic items because they're like, oh, I want to buy the cheaper stuff because inflation is so bad in the day and age we're in. And so then there's more plastic waste generated because people are buying more plastics. And then, as we discussed, the recycling systems are ineffective and they're still ineffective. And then eventually, you know, the public's going to be like, oh, you know, the environment and the pollution, it's bad. Plastic Island will like make the headlines again. And then there'll be some corporations that are like, we're going to be sustainable and pledge to being green. As if they would actually do that, because if we look at history, if history has anything to say, those companies actually are not going to be green. And then you've got consumer guilt. And they're like, oh, I feel bad for all this plastic waste that I'm buying. Well, let me throw it in the recycling bin that's gonna not end up at the recycle. That's gonna not end up being recycled. And there's a perception that plastic is recyclable. And then there's the continued production of virgin plastic. And then eventually, plastic production will increase again, and the cycle will continue. And then you've got this inner circle here where more microplastics are generated, and then microplastics accumulate in food and water. It increases the human integration of microplastics, and then health will continue to decline. And it's not good because people will keep ingesting microplastics, and then they're going to go to the healthcare places where plastic things are actually really good. If you need to sterilize like surgical equipment to do surgery on someone, using plastic to sterilize that is just really effective. And then there's this demand for quick, cheap packaging solutions, especially in hospitals. So then the plastic demand increases. Now let's go over some of these stakeholders. So you've got like Chevron and ExxonMobil. Oh yeah, I got a guy holding a steak over here because, yeah, he's a stakeholder. You got people like Chevron and ExxonMobil. Their business is making plastic. If your business is making plastic, then you don't want to stop making plastic because then that'll put you out of business. Yeah, they invest some money into recycling, but they invest way more money into producing plastic. And then you've got people over here that are like actually in Utah. If you're watching this webinar and you're in Utah, then cool. If you're not, then I guess there's people in your state that are probably advocating for the same things. You've got the Department of Natural Resources. They want the natural lands to look nice, and them not being polluted with plastic is a good thing. Down here, you've got people like landfill owners. They make money by people dumping stuff in their landfills. They really don't want there to be less plastic because more plastic means more garbage for the landfills, means more money, moolah for me. You've got like Pro Polymers in Utah. They are in high agreement. They just don't hold a lot of power. That's a recycling plant in Utah. You've got people in Africa. They would probably rather there not be large amounts of plastic waste in their country, but they don't really have a choice about it. And you got those living on polluted beaches or near polluted beaches. They would rather there not be trash on the beach, but it's not like there's a lot that they can do about it. So then you've got some existing interventions like corporate sustainability pledges, where corporations are like, hey, we're going to be green. Psych, we're actually not going to be green, but we'll be green on paper. You've got Donald Trump's executive orders, which are not very effective. Some really effective things, but that are taking a lot of power, like the UN Global Plastic Treaty that I talked about. Things down here like that are really easy to do, viral exposés on corporate plastic use, where you just take a look and say, look what XYZ company is doing with all this plastic. Here's all this excess plastic waste that they're making. Like I work at Walmart, and sometimes you'll get like a package, and it'll be the product will come in a box, like if you're going to buy it from the store, and then we'll get those boxes inside of a bigger box, and each box will be wrapped in a little plastic bag that I have to take out and discard. You could have just stuck the boxes in the box and not used that little plastic bag, and then bada bing, bada boom, less plastic. Things like that. Or community education programs, just running a little event at the local library about plastic. So here's some activities that you could do, some things that you could consider implementing in your own communities. Creating a viral expose on social media. Consider hosting educational events at public libraries like I talked about. Maybe you have some influencer friends and you can partner with them, like Eco Conscious Moms or Utah-based, I can't, words right now, whatever that word is. Partner with those people on social media and make videos about excess plastic use, about how you're going plastic free. Engage with the local schools. Get the kids to do cleanup drives and pick up waste. And then maybe you'll implant some ideas in the kids' brains about like, there's a lot of plastic waste out here. Or Maybe you have the kids do like a week to see who can go without the least amount of plastic in a day or something. Some risks you might assume with some of these things is people just may not engage with your content on social media. The algorithms could be limiting. Some communities just may not be open to plastic change, or they could be low-income communities where plastic is kind of like the only option. Like you could be like, oh, we're going to do an anti-plastic thing at school, and some of the kids are like, Mom, we need to buy this one, and the sustainable alternative at the store is like $6 more expensive, and well, I guess you have to buy the cheap one because that's all you can afford. Here's some things you're going to have to input if you're going to do these activities. It's going to take time and effort. You're going to need funding. You need grants or scholarships or what have you, depending on the things you're running. Volunteers, like you could be the volunteer, or you could have other people volunteer if you're going to host an event at your local library. That could be a really good thing to do. Technology and platforms. Get on social media yourself. Partner with an influencer. Partner with your friend who's already on social media. Some risks, funding sources could just be non-existent. Maybe you can't find any volunteers. Or tech platforms could decide that they're going to be pro-plastic. It's entirely a risk you have to take into account. Here's some of the outputs you can hope to receive. Increased awareness of plastic pollution through your viral campaigns if you do those. You could get higher participation in community cleanups, especially if you go to local schools and you're like, hey kids, come participate in this local clean the park event where we're going to clean up all the trash at the park or on the beach nearby or what have you. You could get adoption of plastic-free habits by families and schools because you're educating them, and then those families and schools are like, oh, plastic is bad. Let's adopt some plastic reduction policies in our family. And that's where change could start. Then also increase social media coverage. If everybody watching this webinar was to make a little post on social media about the dangers of plastic, then frankly, the more people would be educated about the dangers of plastic. Risks and assumptions. You would risk that people wouldn't engage but kind of drop off. There could be policy changes that are made, but those take time and advocacy, and some audiences may just dismiss the campaign as alarmist. Outcomes you can expect in the short term. More individuals recognizing the impact of plastic on Utah or wherever you are's environment. More families choosing reusable products over single-use products, which is great. Schools and communities could adopt plastic-free initiatives, which could be amazing. Those are kind of like longer, those are kind of medium-term things. Local businesses could begin reducing plastic use, like grocery stores offering paper bags and plastic bags, or just paper bags. And then there'll be pressure on policymakers in Utah or whatever state or areas you live in to reduce the plastics. Long term, there could be a great reduction in plastic waste in Utah's waterways and parkways, or in the beaches where you're at. Maybe you live by a California beach and there's plastic on the beach. You could start to see a reduction in the plastic on the beaches, or even no plastic, because there could be beach cleanup events, and then people could just decide that, hey, we're just not gonna use plastic items, so then you don't have a plastic polluted beach. And then a cultural shift where plastic-free living is normalized in Utah or wherever it is you're living. And then there's some gaps that I've identified, that there's an over-reliance on virgin plastic. So maybe it's time for companies to start investing in biodegradable and compostable alternatives. Like for packaging, there is mushroom packaging or molded cardboard, both of which are recyclable, or you can just compost in your garden if it's the mushroom packaging. Heck, you can actually even eat the mushroom packaging if you really wanted to. They make mushroom packing peanuts that are edible. Or not mushroom packing peanuts, they make, I forget what they make them out of, but they are all natural and you can just compost them in your garden. And then they make the mushroom packaging that tastes the exact same, that's actually better than styrofoam at absorbing impact. We could lower awareness, or there's low awareness of plastic impacts. So one thing that we could do to change that is educate consumers about plastic pollution and promote sustainable alternatives and the effects they have on the human body. And if everybody watching this webinar was to tell one friend about the effects of plastic, then a lot more people, frankly, would know about the effects of plastic pollution. There is also insufficient research on microplastics. We can increase funding for studies on the health and effects of microplastics. Also, there's a high cost of alternatives. We could provide subsidies for sustainable alternatives to make them more affordable, and just basically we need more research to be done on that. Then, because I'm kind of running out of time for my webinar, there's some how might we questions. If you want to, this is going to be recorded, if you want to pause on the recording and go through some of these how might we questions, or even think of your own how might we questions, like how might we make plastic-free living more convenient and accessible? How might we design products that are 100% recyclable or compostable? How might we design a circular economy that completely eliminates plastic waste? These are just questions that kind of get you like thinking, because like at the end of this webinar, I want you to really be thinking like, how can we reduce plastic and just reduce this whole plastic crisis that we're in? And then here are my sources. For sake of time, because I don't have time left in this webinar, I was going to open this up to Q&A, but I do not have time. So I will go ahead and sign off because Zoom is going to kick me out soon.